Okay, it is now 6 p.m., so I hereby call the February 27th, 2024 City Commission meeting to order. City staff, could you please call the roll?
Mayor Butler,
Present.
Commissioner Adamchak,
Present.
Commissioner McCullough,
Here.
Commissioner Opelt,
Here.
Commissioner Motta.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now before we begin the first work session item, the commission needs to determine if they want to allow public comment. Now, we actually have two work session items, so if you make a motion, just to include them both. Does anyone want to make a motion to allow public comment?
Sure, I move that we allow public comment
On both?
on
items?
both, yeah, on both.
Yes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Adamchak,
Yes.
Commissioner McCullough,
Yes,
Commissioner Opelt,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes.
Mayor Butler.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so we have two work session items for tonight. The first one is the East Manhattan Gateway Plan. So who's the presenter for that this evening?
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Jay Dema, and I'm a senior urban planner with Stantec Consulting. And my firm's been engaged by the city of Manhattan to help the city through the planning process for this. And we are also teamed with BBN Architects, who are located here in the city of Manhattan. So I'm here to provide a progress update to the work that's being done. And I'll jump into the presentation if you're comfortable with that. A quick just overview of what we're going to address today. I will talk a little bit about the project, what's involved with it, the timeline that we're following, and then we'll provide brief summaries of some of the work we've been doing over the last couple months, where we've been analyzing existing conditions in our study area, as well as some market analysis related to the study area. And then I'm going to invite my colleague, Lauren Wahlberg, to step up and provide a review of community engagement work that we've been doing. We held 2 weeks ago, held a variety of open houses and focus group meetings, and Lauren will be able to provide that review. And then we'll wrap up with the next steps that are expected in the process. So without further ado, I'll just provide that quick overview of kind of what we're working on and what exactly is the East Manhattan Gateway Plan. It's essentially a guiding vision for that gateway area with a focus on the McCall Triangle and the US Highway 24 corridor. The plan will be intended to provide a vision for how the area is going to develop over the next 20 plus years. So we're looking not only short term, but also long term. And within that plan, address and identify development and redevelopment opportunities and associated infrastructure improvements that would probably be needed to meet that plan. So that's the basics around the what. The where on the plan, the dashed green line is really kind of the definition of our study area here, which is in southwestern Potawatomi County. The dashed yellow line, though, is what we want to draw your attention to in that. We're primarily focusing on the McCall Triangle, which is on the extreme, southwest corner here, and then that Highway 24 corridor. We are also including the Green Valley areas in Blue Township, where there's the residential development and agricultural uses that are still there today in the study area, not necessarily to plan for them per se, because we know that Potawatomi County has done a comp plan in recent years, and they had a sub-plan that focused on the Green Valley community. But we do want to understand that dynamic because continued growth in those residential areas will have a profound impact on Highway 24 and the McCall Triangle. So that's the kind of the where, so we can clarify that. The process or the how that we're going through the planning work is we're starting with really just understanding what's there today to create a foundation of, okay, where do we begin with in this process? And then also understand previous planning work that's been done so that we can not only understand what's been done, but also build on that previous work. And then also gather input in order to formulate sort of a vision for what's needed in the future. And once that vision's in place, we begin to work with the stakeholders in the community and the Community Advisory Committee and start to test ideas for what might be appropriate, interventions to meet that and create that vision. But those ideas, they start off kind of in conceptual form, and then we work through a process where we re-engage the community and stakeholders to refine those ideas down into a preferred idea. And ultimately, based on that preferred sort of plan idea, we create an action plan and implementation steps to guide how we actually get to work and make that happen. So that's sort of the steps in the how of the process. The timeline that's associated with all this work, and I'll come up with this sort of timeline and schedule. What you'll see here is the colored bars on the top half of the schedule, address the different phases of the work. And this initial phase of existing conditions and understanding what's there today and doing a preliminary engagement with the community. We're kind of ending that phase right now. That's where we are here, the green area. But you'll see down there the X's within the green area are indicating the fact that we had a meeting earlier today with the Community Advisory Committee to go over the same materials. And then yesterday we had a meeting with the Potawatomi County Board of Commissioners. And of course, we're here tonight to update the City Commission. The little circle there close to the "we are here," that indicates 2 weeks ago when we did community engagement work. So as you look at this whole process, we're now about to verge on going into the second phase where we develop and test these ideas and these plan concepts, refine that come summer into early fall, and then once we have that preferred plan, we enter into the final plan stages where we start to think about the implementation and the steps that are involved with that. And you'll see here all the points at which we intend to re-engage with the City Commission, our Community Advisory Committee. There's a technical advisory committee that helps us out with tricky technical issues that we meet with periodically, and then of course re-engage in the community. Real quick here, we really kind of began the process for the work in earnest last November. That's the first meeting we had with our Community Advisory Committee, which is an appointed body. And we did an exercise with them where we kind of laid out a couple maps, very, very large maps that take up entire tables. And we set 2 tables aside and split the advisory committee into 2 groups, and we really engaged them about, well, tell us, what you know about the community and the study area, and if there's, what are the main concerns or aspirations, or what are things that you would like to see more of or less of in these areas. So we captured all of these on a variety of sticky notes and handwritten comments on those, and we did end up summarizing them. So we kind of, put them into these categories of things that, are kind of less of or issues of concern that they think need to be addressed, elements that, they want more of and love. And I don't want to go through these in any great detail, but of course you could imagine there's traffic-related issues that come up in many places. There's sort of an uncoordinated development pattern in some other areas. And then people talked about having more businesses, particularly on the eastern end of the study area, and just more planning around how, like, the McCall Triangle can kind of continue to evolve and not have as many conflicts. And then people talked about sort of the things that are really important that they think make that, a really attractive place to be, and that's the nature, the sort of scenic views, and the agriculture that is in part of the Blue Township, and a lot of friendly neighbors and small businesses that folks rely on. So those are some of the things that we took away from that very first meeting that we did with our Community Advisory Committee. And as I mentioned, we'll also do a similar sort of review of work that we did a couple weeks ago with the broader community. I'm now going to step into this sort of existing conditions work that we've been doing, and ultimately, I think, to be clear, what you're going to see here tonight is, a quick snapshot through a series of graphics that we put together that kind of help sort of explain some of the current issues that are important to understand. And that's all getting compiled into what we call a background report or an existing conditions report. And that's still in the process where we're making sure we've got all the little right technical things all correct. And that's going to eventually become an appendix and a resource for anyone who is engaged in this planning process and can refer to throughout the planning process. So with that, I'll kind of hit some of these key highlights. We start off here with a map of just the existing land use in our study area, identifying where the agricultural lands are vis-a-vis where the residential areas are. There's color there for the commercial areas, which are in red, or the industrial areas in purple. And a map like this just allows an understanding of where these different uses are. We know there's a lot of different uses in that corridor, but once you start to get it into a map form like this, you start to see, for example, how the red is obviously sort of congregated around the Highway 24 corridor and so forth, and where there's strategic areas where there's vacant parcels today and other uses as well. So it's giving a good sort of basis of understanding how land is currently being used and organized. We also mapped out sort of the location of public parks and open spaces. Or in many cases, what this is sort of telling is that there's not many parks and open spaces in much of our study area. And that's important to know, and we understand that vis-a-vis a lot of the comments that we've been hearing where people have been talking about being able to have more parks and open spaces, particularly east of the Big Blue River. So it's important to start with, okay, where are we today? What do we have that are of this nature? The next thing that we mapped a few different things related to transportation issues. This particular map displays traffic volumes around most of the major roadways, and you can see that the darker sort of red color really indicates those roadways that have the highest traffic volumes. So for example, along US 24, there's sections where there's more than 20,000 vehicles a day that travel along that. And then also displayed on this map is vehicle crash data. So you start to see where the concentration of that lavender color tends to be where there's more vehicle-related crashes. And that helps us understand, where there might be particularly challenging issues that might need to be addressed from a safety standpoint, or potentially maybe there's some sort of realignment of roadways or something of that nature that might need to address those known problematic areas. And then we did also map sidewalks and trails. And we focused this map right here on the McCall Triangle primarily because there's not a lot of existing sidewalks and crosswalks and other trail things east of the Big Blue River. But then also particularly within the McCall Triangle, there's some nuance to this data where if you looked closely at some of the darker blue lines that are the sidewalks, you can see that there's little tiny gaps that do pop up in those areas, and those are where the vehicle driveway access is. And so to zoom in a little bit more, you start to see some of that, that additional level of data. And that's why we kind of decided to kind of take this map and focus a little bit more on the McCall Triangle. So we start to see where some of the gaps are, both just within the entire sort of system and then at that sort of almost parcel by parcel scale. And then in addition to sort of our multimodal system, we also looked at transit availability. And again, there's no existing transit from the ATA that's east of the Big Blue River. It's just pretty much here in the McCall Triangle. So again, we just focused on that area. So we can see where the routes are, and important for usage is where the bus stops are. So we can see how those are sort of organized in the study area. And then shifting a little gears here, we mapped a number of things related to infrastructure issues, and here's the wastewater infrastructure. And with this, we're mapping kind of where, you know, the extent of not only sort of the existing wastewater infrastructure, but generally the entity that's responsible for managing or maintaining that system. So you can see here we're identifying the fact that there's the big, or the Blue Township Sewer District, which isn't kind of that rose color. It's kind of most of the residential areas in the Green Valley area. And then the green areas are areas that are managed and controlled by the city of Manhattan. And you can see that there's a fair amount of the US 24 corridor, even east of the Big Blue River, that's under the authority of the city as well. And we also mapped down here the location of the wastewater treatment plant. And one of the things in doing this analysis is important for us to know and understand and learn was that a lot of the water that's treated throughout the whole entire study area, even in the Blue Township Sewer District, does come down into the sewer treatment plant that's under the city's control and get treated there. So moving on from wastewater, we then also mapped sort of the water supply infrastructure and what entities are generally responsible for those. So you can see the extent in the green colors, that's the city of Manhattan, and the identifier that notes where the source of the potable water system is there. And then we've also colored in sort of a bluish gray the Rural Water District 1, and then also in this sort of lavender color the Timber Creek Water District. In those, so we have an understanding of kind of where those areas are, and in our existing conditions report, we kind of note some of the kind of challenging ways in which those systems sort of overlap between providing the water, charging for the water, and distributing the water. And then additional here's stormwater infrastructure. We mapped it in this case around where Pottawatomie County has some stormwater infrastructure that they put in place in their sewered and serviced residential areas, and then you see the extent of the city of Manhattan's system for stormwater as well. And related to stormwater and managing water flows from storm events, we did also map on this the location of the levee and where that is, so folks could understand that dynamic as well. And let's see. And then kind of rounding out this existing conditions, our sort of high-level overview here is we also looked at emergency services. This map is fire services, and that we've got several different jurisdictions: the Blue Township Fire Department, the Manhattan Fire Department, and Riley County's Fire District Number 1, and the ways in which these districts sort of have overlaps to them. Each has their sort of primary source, but we learned in this process that a lot of the building type responses do get, if there's a fire incident, the responses can be shared by the different departments in these areas. And we also mapped the location of Blue Township's fire station and the potential future fire station that would be off of Excel Road and controlled by the Manhattan Fire Department. Law enforcement, so we mapped this out here as well. Kind of the green, kind of pea green color with the diagonal blue dots, that's the Riley County Police Department. The blue with the sort of green crosshatch is the Pottawatomie County Sheriff. But again, sort of there's agreements in place where each has sort of secondary service area that overlaps one another. So it may be that one department doesn't necessarily patrol areas, but if there is a call or an incident that requires law enforcement, both departments are in a position to potentially respond to that incident. So we're trying to map that so that that's clear as can be. Okay, and then I'll do a quick overview on some of the market work that we analyzed here in the last several months, to give us a kind of an understanding of kind of the impact of changing demographics and economics, and how the different real estate markets are sort of behaving and are likely to have what kind of pressure or influence or impact might they put on future development in the study area. So I'm going to start with very high level look at some of the key socioeconomic trends. And we have a very simple table here that shows the East Manhattan Gateway, our study area, and then another column that shows sort of the Manhattan metro area. And to clarify, our Community Advisory Committee brought up a great point when we met with them today was, now metro area, do you mean the 3 counties or the 2 counties? And in this case, we just did the 2 counties. But we know that I think the official metro area definition includes Geary County as well, but this is just Riley and Potawatomi County in this case. But you can see here that in the study area, it has roughly 5,000 people in it, but yet its annual growth rate over the last 13 years has been almost 5% a year, and relative to the rest of the metro area, that's very significant. Which I don't think that comes as any great surprise. But what's key to that is the fact that with that growth, comes greater demand for goods and services, and ultimately, puts a lot of pressure on the infrastructure systems. So that rate of growth is good to know. We also know that the nature of the folks living there, there's a lot of children under the age of 15, over a quarter of the population. So when we hear things about more parks and playgrounds and schools and things like that, we know where the source of that pressure is coming from, and that and there's a high percentage of homeowners in the area, and as a result, median household incomes definitely tend to be higher in our study area as well. Another thing I'll mention here is that the market analysis work that we did is getting compiled into an appendix type report with a lot of detail in it. I'm giving you the highest of it, but there'll be a lot more detail in that as well. And so to kind of quickly here summarize my piece of this, there's different real estate markets we quickly analyzed, and folks can see on the housing side of things, we looked at data related to both for sale housing and apartment housing. And just in the last 4 years, the significant increase in cost of housing that's happened, over 30%. For owned housing, and in the 20% for increase in rental housing. And when we engage the businesses in the area in our focus groups, we often heard comments around being able to attract and retain workers and the challenge with the cost of housing that's associated with that. So that's a key thing. And then with respect to, and I'll briefly kind of go over, we looked at retail, office, and industrial, and some data around each of those markets. And the McCall Triangles is clearly the center of a very important regional concentration of retail activity that draws people from an hour or up to 2 hours around the Manhattan region. So we know it's a really, really vital area. And so, but yet the market for retail, when we look at data regarding vacancy trends and rent trends for retail space, things are very, very strong, very, very healthy. There's not a lot of excess retail space in the metro area, and rents have been rising. So those are strong indicators that there's probably pent-up demand. And then we've heard a lot of people talk about having restaurants and more local neighborhood-type retail out on the Highway 24 corridor. And this all aligns with the likely pressure that area is going to see for retail development. And on the office side, it's a stable market. I wouldn't put it as quite as healthy as retail, and that the concentration of office development hasn't necessarily been as much in the east side of the metro area. It's been more on the west side, closer to K-State. But where we do see demand for office space, likely in the study area, would be medical office. That's the one thing that I think is continuing to grow, particularly with all the growing number of families out in that Green Valley area. And then I'll round this out with the industrial conversation real quickly. And what's interesting here is that, again, the McCall Triangle and the Green Valley Business Park, between the two of them, they're more than half of the industrial space in the entire Manhattan metro area. It's an important area for industrial land. The sort of the spike that you see in vacancy on this particular graph is important to note because the McPattern building went up for sale and was vacant. And that put a lot of, that was more than a quarter of the entire industrial space in that one building. And then within a year, it did get absorbed, and Bev Hub went into it, and now the vacancy, we're now down to very little industrial vacancy. So recognizing the room and the space and the opportunity for growth along that 24 corridor, again, we can see a lot of industrial users probably looking at that space and seeing it as being advantageous. So with that, I'm going to invite my colleague Lauren.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. So I'm going to just quickly discuss our community engagement that we did. I will buzz through this pretty quickly, but we do have a full engagement summary that we've put together that's just being finalized, so you will have access to that as well. So for the engagement, we had 2 open houses on February 12th and 13th. One of these open houses was in the McCall Triangle area at the National Guard Armory, and the other one was at Christ Christian Church, and that's in the Green Valley area. We also had a series of focus groups. These focus groups were with area businesses that were invited to participate. 2 groups of developers, one specializing in commercial industrial development and the other specializing in residential development. And then also a focus group with social service agencies. We also have had some opportunities for folks to kind of participate online as well, knowing that, not everybody can come in person to these events. So for the open houses, we had 4 stations. The first station was, mainly informational, sharing some of the information, the existing conditions information that Jay just shared with you. We had 3 other stations that were meant to kind of gather really broad input. This is the first of a couple different opportunities that we'll have to engage with the general public. So for this one, we wanted to really just kind of keep things broad and hear what people think about the study area and what they want to see. So I just want to give you a little flavor for kind of what we heard. This is our big map exercise where people stand around a big aerial and, tell us what they know about the study area, what they want to see. Generally, I think some main themes that came out of it is more walkability and bikeability, more trails and open space. Traffic came up, the safety of the corridor and kind of making it more connected. And then Jay mentioned this too, more kind of restaurants and retail. That came up over and over again, especially on that eastern side of the corridor. We had people write us little 6-word stories about what they want the future of the study area to be. This is just a snapshot of a few of them. We received quite a few of these. Kind of main themes that came out of this, the family-orientedness of the Green Valley area and wanting to have more spaces for family entertainment, more recreation space for, kids. Wanting this to be more of a true gateway and kind of a more cohesive gateway into the city of Manhattan. And, kind of planning that growth goes along with that, which is why we're here today. I think that's all I'll hit on here. And then the last exercise we did was a prioritization exercise where we had people, kind of tell us what they would want you as decision makers to prioritize. This is really small, but you can see reducing traffic congestion rose to the top, both along the US 24 corridor and the McCall Triangle. But there were other things that were important to people, such as enhanced public spaces, more shopping, restaurant, retail, improved walking and transit. And then we also allowed an opportunity for people to write in, and that's the other that you see on the screen there. So for the focus groups, like I said, we met with businesses, developers, and social service agencies. We asked them similar questions, strengths, weaknesses of the area, and what needs do you see? Strengths included the land availability and just kind of this being a key future growth area for the city. The demographics was a strength of both of the people living in this area as well as the people passing by every day. And along with that, just the high volumes of traffic, being important for businesses. Weaknesses, poor circulation, kind of lack of cohesiveness in the area. Flies came up a number of times. And then flooding and kind of jurisdictional conflict. So, a number of weaknesses there. Needs, more density, more rooftops. That's really important to businesses. Just, kind of having more people. And then also, kind of services that support people getting to and from their jobs. So infrastructure, childcare to support those businesses as well, and then more food and entertainment options, which I mentioned previously. So I will now pass it back to Jay. You wrap up.
Yeah, great. And what I'll mention too is the next steps in this planning process. And I want to mention that all the work between our Community Advisory Committee and the community engagement work that we've been doing both in person and then online has been feeding into the creation of a high-level vision statement and a series of high-level supporting goals to help us kind of continue this process now that we transition from gathering data and analyzing data and actually starting to create some planned scenarios for the study area. So that's really our next phase. And so those vision statements and supporting goals, we really engaged with the Community Advisory Committee over those this afternoon, and we're in the process of kind of updating those. And once those are done, then we'll be able to get the City Commission to have access to those as well. And so, yeah, I think the timing of this process now is we're going to go out through spring and then into early summer, and we'll have some of these ideas, these plan ideas, then that we're going to bring back to the community, bring back to our Community Advisory Committee to kind of weigh in on and get additional information. So, with that, I think that wraps up everything we were going to update you on tonight, and we are happy to take any kind of questions you might have.
Commissioners, go ahead.
Yeah, so I noticed we had about 70 people total show up to those community engagement events. How do you think we can improve those for the next round? I think really like to see, a better representation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's, we were talking about this with the Community Advisory Committee actually today, and we were talking about there could be some ways in which we could do some strategic signage. If we had a, partnership, whether it was KDOT or so forth, that we could do some strategic temporary signage. I think there's, more regular communication in the pattern of kind of reaching out and maybe being a little bit more of a bombardment. There's also relying on, we impressed again upon our Citizen Advisory Committee, Community Advisory Committee, that they're part and parcel of this. So they need to work their networks of people that they know as well. So we're looking at a variety of different things to try to improve upon that. What I will mention though, and that even though sort of 70 plus people may sound like it's not a lot, in my experience, doing these sorts of open house sort of environments these days, because people are so attuned to digital engagement and digital strategies, that's actually a pretty good number to feel pretty good about. Can it be better? Without a doubt. But I don't want it to feel like it's something that it was really a terrible sort of process. So.
I got some questions. The flies, is that the impact of agriculture bumping up against urban development and?
Yes, specifically the chicken
Yeah.
hatcheries. I believe that's almost entirely due to the chicken hatcheries.
Yeah, and that's an issue that, must be addressed.
Yeah.
It's not just the flies, but it's the whole idea and I wondered too about the auction, the feedlot auction that they have constantly every Tuesday or something.
Yeah, that I think people had kind of when they often mentioned the chicken hatcheries and the feedlot in kind of in unison. I think the fly issue, which a lot of people just brought up on their own, I think that is we came to understand that's pretty much exclusively the chicken hatcheries. What was really interesting is, we had these big aerials out there, and a lot of people who've lived in Green Valley for a long time know that there's a fly issue. And it was interesting that they didn't understand that there's actually more than just one or two hatcheries. There's a series of hatcheries
Yeah,
that are out there.
there are a
And
lot
that was new to longtime residents. That was kind of interesting to hear that. But you're right, that is an issue. It's a conflict between an agricultural use that's intensive in nature with more sort of commercial enterprise. We had heard anecdotes in one of our focus groups that there was a chain retailer that had interest in a location on the US 24 corridor. And they had done some due diligence work and found out about this fly situation, and they said, nope, we're going to find another spot over further west.
Is there an odor issue too, or is it just?
I don't remember an odor issue ever being the real thing. It was really just at particular times, the flies can be apparently, you just open a door and you're going to have several flies are going to be getting into your indoor space, and when you're outside, they're just all around you.
Yeah, I used to live out there. It's a problem.
Yeah, and I did as well. And the people immediately behind, I was in that, on your map, it was the rural single-family homes, and it still is that way, but there was a swine producer behind our house. So,
Okay.
Yeah. Do the people out there identify, do they say they're Manhattanites, or do they say they're Potawatomi Countyans, or, what do they identify with as far as, if you were from out of town and you were asking them, I'm a Blue Valley Township?
Yeah. I probably would safely say most of the people who live out there don't necessarily identify themselves as a Manhattanite.
Okay. Even though they use
Even though
the
they,
library and the pools?
yes,
and
yes.
And the address,
Yes,
yeah.
and I think if someone probably asked them that was from out of town, they probably would say, I'm from Manhattan, to just simplify it. But their identity was they definitely felt that they were outside of the city of Manhattan.
Yeah, I would wonder too if they're really kind of synced in with some of the things that are going on in Manhattan, and they obviously can't vote for city commissioners or, that kind of thing. Where do they get their police dispatch? Does that go to Riley County, or does that go?
no, it doesn't.
Yeah, the sheriff.
Doesn't it?
I had that situation where I called 911 and got Riley County, but the problem, they referred me back to the sheriff's office in Pot County.
Yeah, that's something that would be interesting to kind of.
Yeah, and we heard a lot of people talk about sort of the confusion around that. Like,
Yeah.
where does my call go, and who is actually answering my call?
Yeah.
There's definitely confusion because of the overlapping nature of
Well, because
of
if
the
they have to
jurisdictions.
get somebody out of Westmoreland, that's kind of a long, I
Yeah.
know they have police in all the areas in Pot County, but, where does the rural water districts, one in Timber Creek, where do they get their water? Do they buy any of it?
The rural
buy
water
from
district
us,
one
or-
gets it from the city of Manhattan.
Okay.
Yep. They essentially purchase it, I believe, from the city of Manhattan. And the timber, that is a series of wells that I believe they put in place. That's been kind of my understanding.
Okay, and where is it treated, do you know?
That's treated at Manhattan in the
Oh, so the-
sewer. Yeah. So that a lot of folks buy water and then they send it back to Manhattan. Yeah.
That's okay. Also, did anybody talk about making the gateway more attractive or more inviting?
Yeah.
Because many of our gateways are really, if you come into them, especially from the west, that's really lovely with all the KSU and the rocks and that kind of stuff. But that's pretty much your average come into town on 24 that's got sort of no continuity and
Yeah.
just all kinds of signs and.
Yeah, we did hear actually quite a bit from folks that there could definitely be an aesthetic upgrade in how things are. Some of the businesses commented about, neighboring properties that maybe don't necessarily keep up their properties. And so one of the things that's part of this planning process would be to, look at the application of maybe like design guidelines. Not, design guidelines can be, limited, or they can be really, really kind of intense, right? I don't think we would be, going to the intense thing, but enough to elevate sort of the experience, particularly in key parts of the corridor that, that visitors are coming from, that businesses that are likely to be there to serve off of, the commuting traffic and so forth, that it would have a certain look and appeal that, would be inviting, so.
Well, they've done lots of gateway studies and showed that gateways set the tone and really, is there a market for all those more restaurants and more shoppies? I mean, do we have it seems like when I drive down McCall Road, there's every possible hamburger I can ever buy.
Yes, I think just about pretty much everything that is imaginable is in the McCall Triangle at this point. I think for a lot of folks in the Green Valley area, they were talking about the process that they have to drive south to 24, and there aren't a lot of good food options in that Green Valley and Highway 24 area. And so then they are kind of forced to make the extra jaunt into the McCall Triangle to really get, more food options. And so I think they see that as, and maybe that's, more of the fast food things that they can pick up and take home and things like that. A couple people talked about an old, there was an old
Chicken place.
chicken place, that had been there for a long time that no longer is there, and that they kind of missed that as sort of a gathering place. So
You often hear that from people, but then they go to the chain stores. I mean the chain restaurants, Chili's, or that you hear, I like to have my little neighborhood place, but they don't support it the way that one would hope.
No, I agree, but to be honest, I think people would take a chain as well.
They're getting a Casey's, so what else do they want?
Yeah, golly, we have that new one. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can give us a read on how the Pot County Commission responded to your presentation.
I think they were, I guess we updated them yesterday, and one of the commissioners said before we even really got into any, we gave them a similar presentation. Before they really got into it, they basically said, let's be serious, what's this going to cost? We want to know about the cost and the tax implications. And from our standpoint, we recognize that at the end of the day, any plan that gets envisioned and adopted needs to go through a process where you have to figure out how to implement it. And then there's a process that you have to prioritize certain interventions, right? And that is fundamentally a cost question. So we know that that's part of the process. But the one commissioner was, just felt that, even though we were trying to lay out our process and what we're trying to do and achieve, he felt that, it was almost useless to talk about it unless there was the upfront money issues, even though there was nothing to discuss that dollar value to yet.
Thank you.
They have one question. I didn't see anything there about the big thing, I think, annexation. Because when you talk about, these jurisdiction conflicts and everything, I mean, people, to me, it's like annexation, that just as a topic. Should the city consider it? Which areas? And of course, that agricultural thing is a big deal. If you annex that, then you get chicken farms, and that doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. And so I'd be interested in that being explored at greater length.
Yeah, without a doubt, annexation is sort of this thing that is ever present, that's out there as, a potential path to address some of these long-term issues. What we've been kind of moving forward with this process is that this is not a plan to determine annexation. This is a plan to create a vision of what's sort of needed to improve that space and environment. And then that might ultimately inform any subsequent annexation decisions you might have, So hopefully that's, it's out there. We know it's out there. A lot of people talked about it in a variety of different ways. But this plan is not there to say, yes or no to annexation. It's about to give, information and knowledge and a shared vision for, what might inform an annexation discussion.
But that's going to be one of the big cost issues. I know that's one of the concerns the
Yeah.
Lott County Commission has, is exactly, how that may in the future shake out.
Yeah, what I will add to that is that one of the things we're going to be doing towards one of our later phases is we have some folks on our team who do a lot of fiscal analysis of different infrastructure investments. And once we have a preferred sort of, or actually I think we're going to do this where we have a couple different scenarios. We're going to invite this team to come in and actually kind of create a model that sort of replicates what the fiscal, cost associated with, this scenario versus this scenario versus this scenario, so people can start to kind of weigh a little bit of that. Now that, again, that's not directly an annexation issue, but it's a piece of information we think will really kind of enrich this planning process.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions? Okay, then what we'll do now is we'll receive public comment. Members of the public in the audience may stand and be recognized to come forward. Please be sure to sign in on the list located at the podium. Please state your name and residential address and organization you're representing for the record and for those listening or watching this evening. Each speaker has 5 minutes and can speak only once and must stop speaking when the timer sounds. Neither the commissioners nor city staff will answer questions or debate an issue. We will take your comments under advisement. So is there anyone that would like to comment on the Gateway Plan? Okay, apparently not. So
Nobody wants to.
we will close public comment. So, commissioners, any other questions of the city staff? Okay, and this is a discussion item, so there's no motion, there'll be no vote on that particular topic. And we'll move on to the next topic, which I guess Jason is gonna lead us in, which is 2024 financial update.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before we jump into this, we've been talking about this internally for a couple months now. We met with you all during your retreat at the end of January. I know a lot of things have been portrayed and a lot of things possibly written and said about where we're at right now financially. What I want to make apparent from the beginning, we're not in a crisis, we're not backs against the wall, but we do need direction and an understanding of where you all would like us to go, and that's part of the reason why we're bringing options to you all. We knew in 2021 that we were going to receive a significant amount of revenue from the federal government, as did all municipalities across the country. Over the last couple of years, that revenue has trickled into the general fund, and we've used it for a variety of reasons. We're obviously realizing a point here where that upward trend of cash balances in the general fund is starting to level off and potentially showing a downward trend after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of upward trends from 17 through 22. So we don't want that to go on very long. We want to highlight where we're spending the money. We want to highlight the revenues. We want to get some direction and some feedback from you all as to how we should proceed. In January of 23, we started with a cash balance of just over $16 million. Our preliminary estimates are right around $10 million. Typically, we don't bring a whole lot of year-end revenues and expenditure final numbers until we get through the month of January, even into February, sometimes in March before April. Typically, we're coming back before you all to look at revenues and how that impacts the next year's budget. But since this dropped so significantly, we feel like we need to talk with you all about it. Again, revenues, expenditures, you're looking at just over a $5.5, $6 million difference in terms of revenues and expenditures. Something that we feel like it took a different path, explainable, but one that we don't have a whole lot of history with. And you can see expenditure-wise, this is our primary focus in our general fund. It's all the supporting departments, administratively and operationally, and then we're into fire, public works, park and rec. That's primarily our general fund. It's where we talk with you on an annual basis about the general fund, and that's about those services. But clearly we have a difference here in terms of those expenditures year to year. In the general fund, 22 million of that is for personnel out of the 38 million that we spent in 2023. Looking forward, just trying to project out the type of revenue that one could anticipate needing in order to keep up with cost of living adjustments, step increases. Now, the past couple of years have been much higher than this, but I do think settling into a rate that reflects where the economy is at is obviously on the horizon. We've seen inflationary costs throughout the last 2 years that have been pretty staggering. These rates at 2 to 4% are more in line with where we operated for years within the general fund. We're hoping, and I think everybody's hoping, things will settle down and fall into these versus the 5, 6, and 7% of inflation that we've seen the past couple of years. All our goods and services and contracts and gas and electricity, fuel, vehicles, all those things have seen significant increases in the last couple of years, but typically we do see 2 and 3 and 4% in those on an annual basis. Just that moderate growth of around 3 to 4% is expensive, and it's in the millions of dollars each year when you look at a $40 million general fund. Those impacts have to be anticipated. We need to start talking about how we want to do this in the future. There are some options laid out here, but just recognizing where we've been the last couple of years is not where we're going to be moving forward for a variety of reasons. I just want to highlight again, the pay study in 22 obviously looked at an overarching macro level 10% increase to pay across the board. It didn't hit everybody. There were people at the one end of the spectrum and another, but on average, we looked at our complete payroll of both in the general fund and in our utilities, and we were looking at about a $26 million payroll, and there was a $2.6 million adjustment. The adjustments in 23 and 24, again, higher than normal to reflect where we were from an inflationary perspective, but also highly recommended in the pay study to keep pace with where everybody else was adjusting, not only on a cost of living, but on a step basis as well. So we were between 6 and 8% in our budgeting. I'll stop right there and just kind of get into a little bit of a conversation with you all about budgeting and actuals. Budgeting is typically the case per department looking at being fully staffed, operating at full capacity, and providing services with really any type of special circumstance, natural disaster, something that we respond to that, it's not every year, but Manhattan has history of tornadoes and floods and fires and the number of things that, impact our community. And we need to have that budget capacity and authority to get out there and do those things. Budget authority and capacity flows throughout the funds, and it's a very flexible number. It grows every year, but again, on the actual side of things, it's a different story. So when we look at 22 actuals, when we look at 23 actuals, it does give us a better feel for what we're actually spending versus what's been budgeted. I bring that up because budgets are not actuals, and we got to be careful about what we're talking about in terms of year to year. Year to year budgeting happens a lot. Year to year actuals are really what we hone in on in terms of actual expenditures and actual revenues received. And we're constantly watching these things. 2024 approach. Understanding we're around $10 to $11 million is the cash balance in our general fund. The primary reasons for that sharp reduction center around vehicle and equipment replacement fund, standing up a new department in the information technology area, capital improvements. Those three things alone are more than half of that $6 million expenditure in 2023. And it'll be more than half of our target for 2024 going forward. We haven't necessarily clamped down on all of these things, but we want to make sure you're aware these things are significant. We have over 150 trucks and vehicles in our inventory and another 50 pieces of equipment that are part of this vehicle equipment replacement fund. A few years ago, we didn't have this. We got the federal money. We started looking around, wanted to be able to answer the questions to you all. What does it take to run the organization in a way where there's enough revenue to replace vehicles every 10 years, to look at technology improvements, sustain those, and pay your people at a rate that's competitive to recruit and retain? When that federal money started coming in and we started looking at the way we were operating, we started building our budgets in a way that informed you all, and it was an education for us in terms of if you're going to annually look at contributing to vehicles, equipment, personnel, and capital improvements in all facilities and all grounds that we have, here's an approach. And we funded it. And we did it in 23. 23 was our first full year of operational personnel cost under the pay study. 23 was the first full year of us buying vehicles and equipment and technology renewals, all out of these funds that we created in the general fund. Our history, prior to 2021, 2022, we didn't do this. Vehicles, equipment, capital improvements, all competed for whatever revenue was anticipated to be left over after our people were paid. After our most valuable resource was compensated, what did you have left in terms of tax revenue to support vehicles, equipment, and capital projects? In those lean years, between 15, 16, 17, and 18, we spent on average of about $100,000 a year on vehicles, equipment, and capital improvements. And we had kicked that can down the road so far by the time we got to 21 and we built this program in order to fund those things. It's substantial. It impacts our general fund over $100,000 monthly to fund this thing. We spent $1.6 million last year in vehicles and equipment. We were slated to spend $1.2, $1.3 million this year. And we would have spent another $1.2 to $1.6 million next year. That's how it's built. You sit there and consistently spend the same amount of money replacing 10% of your inventory every year. Again, we hadn't done this in the past. There hadn't been revenue. It was all competing for the same small pot of money. And when we got the federal money and we got the reserves, we put this in place to reflect what it would cost to do. So 2023, expensive year. 2024, budgeted for the same type of approach. We're obviously not going to do that right away. Some of the vehicles have been purchased. We have spent $650,000, $700,000 of that $1.3 million in the vehicle equipment replacement fund in the first 45 days of the year. That's been halted. It's been stopped. And it won't happen unless we have other things happen throughout the year. Probably not even if we maintained what you're going to see here in the next few slides as alternatives. We can't go spend that money right now. It's not sustainable.
What did you do before 2015?
It competed the same. You got your people paid, you got your contractual services.
So you're saying you've been operating that way in perpetuity?
It varies with your revenue streams, Commissioner. There were certain years where sales tax obviously did well, and we would backfill at that point in time, but it was an annual analysis in terms of what you had revenue to do. We always struggled in bringing those things forward. We identified the vehicles, we identified the equipment, we identified the projects, and the budget would just, over the course of April to August, pare it down and pinch it right out of the budget. So we kicked the can down the road for a long time, but financially, between 2000 and 2015, a different picture. We had double-digit increases in certain years in sales tax. We averaged in 2000 to 2010 right around 5 to 6% annual increases in property taxes. Some years were 8 and 9 consistently back to back. You all who had property in Manhattan, I hope can remember, some of your values doubled between 2000 and 2010. And if you owned a home and you sold it and bought another one, you took that capital and you invested it in your next property. Those were really aggressive years for valuations in Manhattan. Sales tax were also on the rise. And there's a pretty good analysis between, and we did it for downtown redevelopment. Between 2006 and 2012, the amount of sales tax we were sending to the state of Kansas doubled in this town. So again, your revenues weren't the problem. They were materializing at a much quicker pace, at a much higher level than after that period of time. And it just became difficult. It really centered back into a mill levy discussion. And the mill levy for the general fund hasn't moved a whole lot, especially in the last 8-9 years. And it just became a difficult conversation at the end of every one of those budget seasons. And it's I mean, obviously you get that money from the feds, you talk with, the governing body and the organization about where to put that money. There's some areas that really needed it, and we invested in it. And I would still say you need those vehicles and that equipment to operate. You need to pay your people a competitive wage in order to recruit and retain. Is there flexibility there? Yes. Do you need to spend $1.5 million every year on vehicles and equipment? No, you don't need to. But you've got to recognize every year you don't do it, you're moving it out. And is it $3 million the next year, or is it just another $1.5 million? Or, again, we've operated with less year after year in the past. We know how to do it. If that's the direction we get tonight, we'll go back and do that. There are options, though. There are alternatives, and we just want to talk about those. The general fund, just kind of generally speaking, 90% of it comes from non-property taxes. And I think you've all heard me up here at nausea talk about that. But it is a very, it's 10%. 10% of that entire fund, or less than right now, is coming from property taxes. So we do focus on other revenue streams, which are volatile. They're not as predictable, and they're not as consistent. Previously, we had talked about ARPA funds. We have $4.7 million remaining. We had originally anticipated targeting that towards the enterprise resource planning system, the ERP, that we've talked about now for several years, and we're on the cusp of purchasing this. And it's going to be expensive. It could be debt financed. It's a piece of infrastructure for this organization that'll last us for quite some time. I think the one we have in existence has lasted a lot longer than most people would have ever guessed, but it's time. It's time to do it. That $4.7 million could integrate its way into the general fund and assist with continuing the transition from the reliance and dependence on that federal dollar into more of a sustained approach. We would be open to working with you all on different scenarios, whether it's all or a piece or a part, and what does it go for, what does it not go for in the general fund. We could easily have those conversations, but it's one of those things that it's out there. It's something that you have flexibility with. You don't have to use it to buy the ERP system. It can come back into the general fund. It can come back in as a lump. It can come back in as a splitting it, but it could prop up that operation in the general fund, like the past 5.2 million did. And again, that 5.2 million moved in 2022, and that's a real big reason why in 2022 we usually average $6 to $7 million in a transfer. We had $12.6 million in 2022 in the general fund, which helped support that fund balance for the last couple of years. Long term, which is really the impetus for this conversation, trying to get to a position where we understand what your expectations are, not only 2024, 2025, 2026. It's really taking a look at how we operate, how we're funded, the services we provide, and how do we create a consistent, sustainable operation. We recognize without the federal money and without the adjustments we've made, we can't continue to operate the way we have been. And it's primarily those three areas. You can't continue to increase the pay of people at the rate we are. We can't continue to operate the VERF the way we are, and we can't continue to invest in our facilities and our grounds, in our right-of-way the way we are out of the general fund. We can reduce services. We've done this before, and again, I think it would benefit the commission to hear from the departments like we have in the past of just what that looks like, how that would be impacted and absorbed within their respective budgets. They're going through that exercise right now for management, and based on some feedback tonight, happy to bring that information to you all and talk a little bit about the impacts to each of those departments. The one-time maneuvers, just a reference to near exhaustion. We need to sustain ourselves. And again, if it's a reset and it's a relook at what $32 million in revenue can support in the general fund versus the 38 we spent, then that's part of the exercise. Maybe it's a fraction of it, maybe it's a percentage of it, and we look at how we want to retool the way we deliver services. But again, that long-term impact of vehicles, equipment, deferred maintenance, it does take a toll when it's year after year. We've struggled with property tax increases, just a real lack of tolerance, and I don't cast that on any of you individually. There's just a lack of tolerance, community, state, nation, on property taxes. It's just a sensitive issue, sensitive topic, tough to get them passed. User fees, we haven't had a lot of luck in the past with user fees. You obviously hear from the user. They're not happy when you increase their fees. That's to park, that's to swim, that's to go to a rec center, that's going to get a building permit, filling out a zoning app. I mean, all the things that we require people to come in and pay for, the services that they're receiving, they don't have a lot of positive things to say when we increase those. And then looking at the sales tax, it's another opportunity. We have a 1 cent right now. Half of that cent was passed in the early 1970s. The other half was passed in the early 1980s. So it has been 40 plus years since we've entertained increasing that permanent sales tax on a ballot. So obviously you can go up to 2. It can be in increments of 0.1%. But it does require the citizens by a majority to vote that in. Short term, As I mentioned, we're really honing in on people and projects, programs, and services. Believe we can sustain 2024. I really do. There's some things that happened in the organization towards the end of the year that I think we can curb and redirect some efforts in our departments. I worry more about 25 and 26 and just how we're going to approach these years, again, coming out of that dependence and use of those federal dollars. Sales tax question. We had talked about some options. August primary is an option. The county clerk was not real excited about doing a mail ballot this year. I think you heard at InterGov, they're extremely busy this year with 3 different presidential elections. I think the one in March is the first time we've done it in Kansas or Manhattan since '92. It's been a long time since they've done the caucus or the canvassing at that point in time. So it's going to really stress their office, and Rich wasn't, obviously he didn't say no, but he was like, hey, that's going to be really hard for us to do a mail ballot, which we talked about a little bit at the retreat. August primary is an option, obviously far less expensive and far less burden on the clerk's office to administer something like that. And then you have the November ballot as well as an option. We were looking at redirecting that $4.7 million to ARPA into the general fund, look at debt service, the ERP program. If you look at our fund balances, our bond and interest fund, and most funds that we're operating are getting better with the exception of the general fund. But we would look at implementing a lot of reductions and changes in 2024 in order to sustain ourselves. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the budget process for this summer. And whether or not it's a sales tax question or we realize some sort of answer along the line in the summer where we got to rehone and refocus. We do have a lot of experience and people who are still here who have been around for the last 9 or 10 years, and we've watched ourselves vacillate and pinch where we need to pinch in order to make things work. So I'm confident we can get that done. But at the same time, you all need to know where that's at, how it impacts services, if it impacts them at all, and just how those strategies play out. We don't want to catch you off guard. Again, long-term, looking for direction that we can sustain our ops or hit that reset button and understand, are we going to live within our current funding levels? Are we going to look at generating additional revenue to really move forward what we're doing today as it pertains to people, vehicles, equipment, capital improvements? Or do we want to be looking even further of that 3 to 5% annual operating expense that typically hits municipalities across the board, whether it's through people or just the cost of doing business, just increases to deliver the same level of service. That strategic plan that we went through and identified a lot of our goals and our mission and our vision, a lot of it had a tie to the budgeting process to realize those objectives and those goals. We really want to hone back on that and take a look at that. If we're not able to sustain ourselves, we may have to look at those priorities and that vision and evaluate just where we are and possibly reset those if the reset mode is an option you're interested in looking at. This slide's been in our PowerPoints and talks with the commission for some time. Cash balance has obviously increased over time. In 2017, our cash balance at the end of the year was $1.7 million. 2018, it grew to 3.1. 2019, it grew to 3.4. 2020, it grew to 6 million. 21, 22, and 23 are obviously much higher than that, and we know revenue has come in to the general fund from other sources than we have a lot of control over. But 17 through 20 was a very conscious effort to underspend our budgets and our revenue streams in order to grow that cash balance. And it was a struggle, and it pent up a lot of demands on the organization. I wouldn't say it's something that we are all that excited about reliving, but we also understand we need that guidance and direction from you all. So it's always going to be part of an option. It's always going to be part of looking at services and see what you want to continue to deliver and what you possibly could live without. Revenues, expenditures, it's always a balance. But that cash balance is very important. It's very important to the rating agencies who put a score associated with your debt. The better the score, the better the rate you get to finance your debt. Debt is a whole nother topic we can get into. Some of you are probably going to need that because it is a topic that typically comes to the surface when we talk about, hey, taxes may need to increase or services may get adjusted. Well, where are you in your debt? How can you possibly have $300 million in debt? Maybe you shouldn't do so much debt. Debt is a whole nother topic. And we need to make sure you're well informed and understand how debt is structured, how debt is paid for. There are a lot of revenue streams available to debt that are not available for operating. It's just the way municipalities are framed and administered. So we've got a lot of 10-year questions out there that do support debt. We have a few. We have one in the street maintenance that actually gets out there and does projects, visible projects in our community. But that general sales tax is typically how we've operated our organization and our general fund over the years. That's the last slide I have this evening. Again, really want to get you to a point where you have a level of understanding of where we're at financially. The transition that I want to accomplish next, Aaron Stewart is our new Park and Rec director. I say new, it's almost a year. Has been with us and has been out with his move MHK. Operationally, we've talked internally about a number of projects that we've administered over the last 5-7 years that we've built. And we've had strategies on how to generate revenue to operate these facilities. And I mentioned some of them earlier. Pools always comes up. There's an operating subsidy there. We get into the zoo and the Discovery Center, and we look at how much it costs to operate there, how much revenue we generate. And just about, both of those are significant subsidies as well, along with the pools. Parking garages, rec centers, things we've invested in, multi-million dollars. There's always been strategies along with those. They're just difficult to implement. It's difficult to charge individuals after something like that is built, and everybody wants to use it. It's brand new to implement those strategies. And there's reasons why we haven't done it. I'm not saying it's just hard and commissioners haven't done it, but the feedback we've received and some of the impressions, some of the continued construction in Aggieville does fly in the face of charging everybody and regulating parking down to a very tight ran operation. So there is relief. There is an acknowledgement of things that have kept us from doing some of these things. I've seen commissioners take a lot of feedback on pools over the years, and that's a difficult rate to adjust. You can adjust it, and within 30 days you can be back in here and adjusting it again, which we've done. It's just that much feedback and that much opinion can be expressed, and the governing body can give direction to do something different. Where we're headed is a conversation about indoor water. Indoor water has been around for years, talked about in this community, but it really picked up pace when the natatorium closed. And Aaron's got a presentation that's going to highlight some of the survey results and some of the momentum that's been gained in the last couple of years. But the reality of this situation is an operating subsidy is significant with indoor water. Now, there are revenue strategies, and Aaron has great ideas and great philosophies and practical experience on how to do these things. But going into it, we have to be aware of a $1.5 to $3 million type of operating subsidy potential. We can talk revenues all day. We can talk about charging people to get into these things and programs and all types of activities and events to generate revenue. Actually doing it is one thing. Building this thing without a revenue stream to support the operation is something that we have a lot of heartburn about recommending. We would really prefer that operational revenue show up in support of us asking an additional question to actually build that indoor water. So the strategy we laid out in the memo and the strategy that Aaron's going to expand upon, do you place a question on the August primary looking for a permanent sales tax of a half cent, quarter cent, 3/4 cent, full cent to sustain operations in the general fund to support Park and Recreation, Public Works, Fire Department, the departments that obviously Community Development, Airport, City Manager's Office, Finance, Legal, HR, all the departments that are supported in that general fund. So we can sustain ourselves and position ourselves for that future indoor water improvement. If it passed in August, we would know how to approach the 2025 budget with greater clarity, and you could contemplate within 3 weeks turning around and asking the question on the November ballot as to whether or not indoor water is part of a quarter cent quality of life renewal type of tax, and is quarter cent enough. All those discussions are what we're talking about. Further information, more discussion and input and feedback in March and April. We owe the county a resolution by June 3rd if we want something on the August ballot. We owe the county a resolution by the first week in September if you want something on the November ballot. Again, these are topics and strategies. We're looking for feedback tonight on what additional information do you need. You obviously may have a position already. You can share that. But we're looking for that guidance and direction. So before we get into, if it's all right with you, Mayor, we'll move forward with Aaron's presentation, and then we can both answer questions.
Good evening, Commissioners. So before we kind of go into kind of the Move MHK stuff, I want to give you a little background on kind of what we've been doing and what we will be doing over the next, for my duration here, which is mission-driven, values-based culture. So this is something that I brought with me that I've kind of developed over time, and that really builds what our culture will be in the Parks and Rec Department. You can see our 5 core values are listed up there, which is diversity, fiscal responsibility, integrity, innovation, and service. And so everything that we do is going to be captured in the lens of our mission and in the core values. So any decision that we make, we're testing it against those values and against the mission, which is building a healthier community through people, places, and programs. So everything that I will come and suggest to you has been tested against this. I found this to be very effective to run a well-organized Parks and Rec department, which I would state very plainly that we are a business within a city government, and we need to run like a business. So part of what's coming in Move MHK is going to be that operational review, what our financial position is, what our market penetration is, how well we're serving the community, our staffing levels, and if they're appropriate, and then we'll talk cost recovery. Now, I know you've got some experience with cost recovery, which is an operational cost recovery. And when I talk about cost recovery, I talk about total cost recovery. So that includes all expenses, everything files into that, to align in that pyramid that you probably saw for operational cost recovery, rather than just the program operations, because we're leaving out everything that Parks does to provide that program. Specifically, let's take baseball. It's not counting the setup. It's not counting any chalk that we have to put down if it's a natural surface, or take care of the turf, or any of those items. They need to be included in that cost recovery so we can have a fully transparent conversation, which is, for us, that fiscal responsibility value. So that way the community knows exactly what it costs to run that program and how much they're subsidizing it by. So again, financial strategies that we're going to look at, I talked about cost recovery. Regardless of what we do with a tax, we're going to be looking at expense reduction. That's through efficiencies, that's through aligning the staffing appropriately. I think there's a lot of area that we can kind of cut up and get more efficient with to get a better bang for your buck. Program growth, we're hardly capped out in program growth. We should be expanding that. For example, we are moving Little Apple Day Camp. We've got at least 185 spots for people this year. Last year was 120. So we're maxing out our license on that, and we're looking to expand even more. So in doing all this, especially with full cost recovery, you really got to look at the equity of the situation and make sure that there's an avenue for those that can't afford the pricing that would be out there, have an avenue to get there. Our sponsorship, or our scholarship program, which, sorry, is the last bullet point, really needs to be redeveloped. It caps it at $150 per family. So the reality is you may have to choose whether you get a pool pass and what programs. You may have to choose between children, and that's defeating the purpose of having the program. So we'll be bringing that forward. Sponsorship program, every organization I've ever worked for, we highly engage sponsors to help offset costs. A great example of this is, and I'll shout out to the Cats because they had their home opener for baseball, is on the fence line, there's tons of sponsors out there for their baseball fields. I think we can do some target marketing to capture sponsorships. The example I use is 42,000 people leave Annenberg every year to go eat. I'm sure I can find some restaurants that would like their restaurant front of mine out on those fence lines. So sponsorship program redevelopment, new opportunities. I think there are always new opportunities, new programs, but there's also probably new ventures, potentially concessions, things like that, that can draw in additional revenue. Strategic partnerships are, of course, important. Our standards are USD, K-State, when available. All of those situations can help us offset costs. So this is kind of a condensed slide of all those graphs that I showed you at the commission retreat. So I just want to remind you, the household preference was 63% for the indoor aquatics only. The recreation center with indoor aquatics was the 22%, and the people that said we don't want either option were 15%. Sales tax support, aquatics only, that went out at 69% potentially supportive, with 31 saying no. And the rec center with the sales tax support with indoor water, 68 potentially supportive and 32 saying absolutely not. So in the strategic facility improvement plan, there are two questions that aligned up with the survey results. The first one being the 47% of households identified a need for indoor aquatics. That was in 2015. That jumped to 63% of households identified a need for indoor aquatics. So I think it's important to note in the 2015 that the natatorium was still open when they completed the survey. The 37% of households indicated none of their indoor aquatic facility needs are being met. That's now jumped to 56. So you can see a real big trend up over the past 7-8 years just because the natatorium closed. That would be my interpretation. We didn't have a direct correlation on this one, but 41% indicated that they would utilize indoor aquatic facilities the most as an indoor programming space. And this series, the question that probably closely aligns with that is 74% agreed building a new indoor aquatic facility should be the priority over the next 10 years. Some other anecdotes in there, 2022, they completed the indoor aquatics feasibility study. The main purpose of that one was to try to kind of weigh in on some site preference, capital costs, facility concepts, and operational costs. So that was completed then, and then 2023, the community survey, just 78% of respondents supported the development of indoor aquatics. So if you can look between that one and the 74%, that's within the margin of the error for the survey. So pretty close on that. So what to expect as this comes due is they're going to talk about indoor water, and we're going to look at aquatics only, which would be a leisure pool, lazy river, 50-meter pool, and then warm water and diving well. The rec center, they're going to have those aquatic components. It's going to be smaller in size. For example, you'll have a 25 meter by 25 yard pool rather than the 50 meter. You would have fitness center and studios, walking track, learning kitchen, multi-purpose meeting rooms, community gathering areas, and indoor playgrounds. All those tested out fairly well in our survey. So they would be looking at that if we're looking at a rec center development. So there are park developments that we've asked for out of this plan. City Park, Northview Park, and Northeast Park. So City Park, you're going to see we're going to talk about a little bit today, but we'll do a full redesign on all three of those parks. Northview and Northeast Park were chosen because we would like to see some of the similar amenities that are offered on the west side of Manhattan be engaged in those parks, and they're long overdue for an overhaul. So concept reviews. The initial concepts will go to the Move MHK Steering Committee and the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. That's going to happen on March 4th. They're going to review the two park concept designs as well as the city park design. We are asking them to design the park with the aquatic facility / recreation facility in City Park. There are reasons for that as far as population density and who's around that park, and City Park is badly in need of an update. And then we'll bring they'll refine those concepts a little bit, and then we'll bring that to the City Commission on a work session on April 23rd so you can weigh in. So just the timeline, if we are looking at potential sales tax, June 4th, you would have the ability you would be presented the final plan and have the ability to adopt that plan at that time. August 6th would be if you voted to allow that sales tax to be on, we would find out then. We're going to assume for this timeline that that's approved. Then November 5th, we could renew the quality of life sales tax and begin the indoor aquatic facilities and city park redevelopment. 25 through 26, we would finalize design, and we would create the partnership agreements, park design, and any phasing elements that would go along with that sales tax. Construction in 26 and 27 in what I would call phase 1 of City Park to get to a facility grand opening. So part of, just for example, if we took this down the line and looked at a project example, here would be decisions that would need to be made. What's the cost recovery? The facility design, aquatics only versus a rec center. Now, it's obvious that it came back, people were talking about indoor water only. We're also here talking about an operational subsidy, through the form of sales tax to pay for something. The reality is we need to consider a rec center. Rec centers create profit centers that help subsidize pools. It's a business model rather than trying to get those other elements. Those other elements support the indoor water and reduce the overall tax subsidy over the life of that facility. It is an important component to manage long-term costs on a facility. And we're talking 25 to 50 years. It makes a difference. The 2022 study examined $1 million subsidy in year 1 for water. If we push forward with aquatics only, you can expect that to be a $2.5 million subsidy by year 5. Water destroys everything, and you need to do capital reinvestment in pools to keep them relevant every 5 years. So it's very important that this is a topic of discussion, not because we necessarily want a new rec center, but mainly because this is probably a smart financial business decision to build a rec center to help offset tax. So the other avenue that you can consider is we're currently subsidizing, last year we subsidized our pool by a little over $1 million. We can talk consolidation. I know that's not popular here, But the reality is, Manhattan really needs 1, maybe 2 pools. And again, we're subsidizing by $1 million already. That would pay for year 1 of a new aquatic center. We can also build something that's centralized in City Park that would serve 29,000 people within a 10-minute walk, and put splash pads, which are actually more equitable, out in Northview and Seco Park. They're free. You can use them longer. They cost much less to operate. So that is a decision that would need to be made. If we went that route, how do we transition into an indoor-outdoor water park that serves the entire community, and then move forward with replacing splash pads, and how would we phase that? Again, we've talked about City Park. I just told you why centralized. I hope that we have some concepts so you can see what they're talking about. I know people are concerned with open space. There is an ability to keep both, to really put a nice architectural structure in there that draws the eye line and draws you into the park. Because as I just looked at Placer data earlier, our park attendance continues to dwindle to the tune of we're pushing close to 100,000 compared to 2021, less visits per year. Capital funding, again, phasing how we do those improvements. Do we build an indoor and then an outdoor, and then we pull out the existing outdoors and put in splash parks, or whatever that phasing might look like? Again, I talked about the capital reinvestment. Every 5 years, you're going to need to put something new, something entertaining in there. Partnerships, I would anticipate that we could have a minimum a partnership with the school district, as that would be a pretty important facility for their teams. So we would examine all partnerships available and try to capture as many of those as possible to help offset some of the capital funding, and then operational considerations. So one of the biggest comments that comes up is, if we take away those pools, how do kids get there? Obviously, most of you are aware we still have, with ATA, we have an agreement that allows kids with a pool pass to ride for free. That's one way. I will just tell you from experience, the pool in Garden City was one of the hardest ones to get to, because you crossed two business highways to get to it. We never had a problem. We brought in 60,000 people a year. So kids found a way, and they did not have the bus pass. So again, operational cost increases. So we just need to have a plan in place for those. How are we going to capture that? Because water destroys everything. So I would happily entertain questions.
Maybe just so that I'm sure that I'm following, when you're talking about your city park, you saying the one indoor-outdoor aquatic center and recreation center all in one complex?
The part that we're going to ask them to examine is a rec center. If that rec center would have indoor water. The other option is aquatics only. Either way, I think the right move is to pair an indoor and outdoor water park. And we'll see what the consultants say, right? They'll weigh in on this. Just from a centralized location, and you can build a bigger and better water park that has the amenities that people want through consolidation, and then we're maintaining that single facility, indoor-outdoor, kind of two, but indoor-outdoor, and then we have the splash pads in the other locations.
So would you retain the existing pool as the outdoor part of that?
No, that pool is outdated. It needs to be revamped, and they've done a good job of keeping it maintained, but with the shift of probably where we would put the indoor facility, we would rebuild the outdoor.
So there would still be an outdoor pool?
Correct. If that's the path we move forward with, let me be clear about that. If there was no outdoor option, the outdoor pool would stay. It would be whether you want to consolidate a project or not.
Aaron, could you go back also to your timeline?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so August 6th, current and future.
So I didn't know how to label that because we don't have a name for the tax. That's the tax that Jason's talking about for operational support.
Okay. That was where I was confused.
Yeah.
But we would be looking for that tax to, as I mentioned, position the general fund for the future, as well as generate enough revenue for the operation of the indoor aquatics.
Okay.
I think Aaron brings a lot of new ideas, fresh ideas, experience from other places, and all of that is exciting, and we need to incorporate in our approach. Our recent history of building multi-million-dollar facilities, I think we need a little security here operationally before we dive into a cost recovery model. I can't reiterate enough how sensitive folks in this community get and how influential they are on you all. And I think it's a risk to ask this organization to go build probably a minimum of a $40 million and upwards of a $60 million facility, first phase, to get indoor water and not have an operational revenue stream.
So the proposal to have a sales tax in November would recommit the existing quality of life tax to focus primarily on the construction of the pool, is that, or the
That's
aquatic center?
That's correct. That current tax runs to the end of March 2028.
And what's it paying for right now?
It paid cash for both rec centers at Anthony and Eisenhower, and will pay cash for Seco renovation at $15 million.
And there's 2 million
Trail.
up, well, with some influx, maybe up to $4 million worth of trail improvements.
Right, which I saw that on one of your slides, but you didn't really address it.
Well, the one PIR rating that's not listed in there that I talk about aquatics actually relates back. The top score on that was trails.
Thanks.
And I just as a point of clarity, Move MHK is much bigger than just indoor water. So there will be all these other elements to it as well. This is just the big fish in that pond.
Yeah. But that quarter cent won't pay for that pool complex.
It wouldn't, Commissioner, and that's where a lot of analysis and a lot of discussion needs to take place. The 0.25, based on today's revenue streams, would generate roughly $40 million over that 10-year period. Difficult to say what it'll generate between 2028 and 2038, right? But what we also know is the cost of construction is a very difficult thing to predict. So the question itself, I think, would inherently require additional partnerships. We know the foundation is actively pursuing donations, Grow Green, with a really a major focus in indoor water. I think scholarships, sponsorships are their other vein of fundraising that they're pursuing, but indoor water is that capital improvement that they're targeting. Aaron mentioned it, the relationship and partnership with the school district is also viable. Our administrative conversations have been positive. There's been an acknowledgement of those programs and an acknowledgement of the need for the facility and an acknowledgement of a potential revenue stream to come to the city over time.
Can
I've got more to talk about, but I just want to commend Aaron. I think it was a very good presentation. A lot of stuff that you've thought about and obviously put together in a plan. Also, I have to say, the only presentation all my years in the city where you talked about efficiencies, immediately tied it to cost reductions that you seem very committed to getting to. The sponsorship you mentioned were things when we've been talking about for a long time. Glad to see buy-off on that, and then, of course, partnership. So thank you.
I see Tracy Anderson in the room. Tracy, could you tell us how far you've gotten in your goal towards 10,000?
Oh, I can answer that. I can answer that question. They cleared 12,000, so they've got 12,000 in the endowed fund to be able to for Grow Green.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the rec center is more long-term sustainable for operations. Is that just because there's more of a variety of services that can be provided and potentially charge some use fees and things like that for?
Yeah, so, I mean, if I'm gonna be frank, user fees need to be charged everywhere. We do not charge enough. The fact that we don't charge at our existing centers is an issue, obviously. Yes, you treat a rec center as a bunch of profit centers within a building to make money to offset that subsidy of the pool. The kicker here is you have to have a good scholarship program that would be able to apply for even memberships to provide that access for people that have lower socioeconomic needs. There's a long-standing philosophy that if users benefits more than non-users, and those that can pay should pay. Like, there's no reason that I shouldn't pay for my family to participate in sports at an appropriate level, rather than throwing a blanket over everything and saying, nope, nobody's paying for anything. We need to really target that to the people that need it. That's a better, more efficient use of our funds. And really, the whole reason we exist is to serve all. But in doing that, I'm going to push on that fiscal responsibility value that we need to do that in an appropriate way where we apply equity more than equality. And that equity allows us to serve those that can't necessarily make the payments.
Aaron, I did not follow it very closely at the time, but I understand there was some pushback against having the exercise equipment, workout equipment at the Douglas Center by a certain entity here in town. What do you anticipate if we're going to invest in a multifunction recreation center?
So again, I think, we've met with those groups. They were one of the stakeholder groups, and we've heard everything across the spectrum. The survey results returned that is a high priority for our community, that they would like to see that, meaning that there's not enough in this community, and they're asking us to provide it. I would anticipate, if that's the path we go down, that we reconvene that group and see if we can't move forward together. The reality may be that if we can't see eye to eye, it would be a decision that, the governing body may have to make, that whether you're going to do that or not do that. I would argue that our kind of philosophy with that is to introduce people into it, which actually helps support those types of businesses, because they'll eventually leave us to go to that higher and more intense type of level.
So I got a couple emails, people asking, is it possible to do a partnership with some of these businesses? Like to include the aquatics things. There's companies that run, indoor aquatics facilities like in Omaha and places like that where I've been. Is there any way to partner with them?
You're going to pay more. If you try to hire that, they don't do it for free. You're gonna have to hire them out.
But we
You're
were
gonna pay
talking
more.
user fees, if there's some way, is that worth exploring? That's the question I got, and I wasn't really sure. I remember, when Genesis was building their thing, this came up, and we talked about maybe partnering with Genesis on an indoor pool when they built their facility. People didn't like that, and maybe it's because the cost is prohibitive, but, I'm not sure where we come up with all this money otherwise.
Well, there again, I think the strategy for that particular facility would be an operational sales tax and then a capital sales tax. I think if you're talking about how we can improve the existing features and what we have, that's where those efficiencies, maximizing revenues, and part of that is we need to prioritize and really recognize that there are some things that we're not going to be able to do. I'm prepared to live within if none of this happens and we're at that $32 million, just hypothetically speaking, our section of that is 30%, which is a $9.5 million budget. I'm prepared to do that. And we'll do that through prioritization. And we'll start with revenue generation, and then we'll start and look at parks, and we'll use placer data to determine what parks are used the heaviest and order them from 1 to 30. And we may only be able to get to 15 of them, but we'll be able to tell you which ones we're getting to and which ones we're not. We can also do transitions into more efficient maintenance priorities, which we've done already. Some of that's pollinator pockets, returning it to native. We'd obviously have an emphasis on trails. I mean, trails are extremely important, to your point. They ranked high, so we would continue to manage that effectively, but we would not be able to do everything at the capacity that we would want to. So priorities would have to be made, choices would have to be made, and honestly, that's been my entire career in government service, so that's nothing new to me.
I think it'd be really helpful if we could have a history of sales tax, what we put on at what point and when it went off and how much it made and how much, that just kind of a graph. The thing about indoor swimming, you can't be everything to everybody. And it seems to me that one thing about outdoor swimming in the summer is that people like to go and sit in the sun and probably get too much sun, but, they don't just go swim, and they do go to do more sort of messing about in the water and, that kind of thing. Whereas pools, indoor pools, are generally, and if I look at Genesis, and I use Genesis, they are more programs for fitness, they are more programs for swimming teams, that kind of thing. And we do not have anything in Manhattan really as far as thermal kind of swimming for people that need, the hot tub kind of larger. And so, yeah, I just think we ought to throw that into the occasion.
So-
Yeah, the warm water pool, I know, yeah.
Let me add a little clarity. You're right, there's going to be a fitness/swim team component. That's going to be the 50-meter pool or the 25
Yeah.
by 25 yard. Now, one of the interesting things that we found through some of this is you can actually build in a floor that you can raise. So you need at least 7 feet to dive off a platform. We could raise that to 3.5, 4 feet. Now we can do swim lessons through the entire thing because we're at the appropriate depth. So you can do some multi-use things. The other thing, your primary draws on that are going to be your leisure pool, your lazy river. Diving well for kids, ironically, especially if you have and I'm going to get the meters wrong, and I know Sydney's in here, so don't hold it against me, but it's basically 10 feet. That is extremely popular. That's where we talk about putting some of those amenities like Ninja Cross in. It's going to have water slides. It's a water park, not a pool. And I think we tend to say pool, and I'm guilty of it myself, but the reality is what we're talking about is building a water park. Now, we're not talking about building Great Wolf Lodge. We're talking about building an indoor water park that would attract visitors, and that leisure water is going to be the primary water. And sure, we'll have the amenities that we need to do for swim team, at least that 25 meter by 25 yard pool and the diving well. We'll be able to use some of those other components for other activities too.
Yeah.
What's the operational cost of the variable floor swimming pool?
TBD, I don't have that number yet.
Thanks for putting this together. In the conversations we've had, I can really tell that you do care about this. You want Manhattan to have a good parks department, and that is one of the top things that I have heard from people as well, is that we need a better Parks and Recreation department. I think this is a really great start, and it is kind of a good way to show that we are working towards that and trying to make things better. And it also gives the community the opportunity to put their money where their mouths are, right? They get to make the decision on the sales tax if they really want it. I think with the lap lane pool, I think that's something that I think honestly we should be embarrassed that our high school has to go to a city that is a quarter the size of us to practice. and aside from that, there are adults and other people who would love, myself included, who would love to be able to go and swim some laps on a Saturday.
Sure.
And really, it's something that everybody can use. Even if you can't walk, you can get in the pool and float around and get some exercise. So that's really something that I would really like to make sure that we keep in. But yeah, this is a really, really good presentation. So thank you.
I would point out, not that lap pools are not important. Obviously, again, we will do that. We will make sure we have that amenity and the appropriate level. I always flip to the frozen ice to illustrate this point. How many people play hockey versus how many people free skate? Free skate exponentially higher. That leisure pool is where a lot of focus should be. Lap pools are pretty simplistic. Now, if we can put a floor in there that allows us to use multi-use, that's more money. Even if it's a higher investment initially, that's a lot more use out of a singular pool that would otherwise not get it. So those would all be part of a package. At this point, you can determine what slides you want, you can determine that, but these are the main components that you cannot get away from.
Yeah, I also really recognize the potential for year-round swim lessons. I know from recent experience, summertime swim lessons are very difficult to get into in Manhattan. And if we could spread that demand out throughout the year, I think that would really be good for our community.
It also allows us to offer them at non-peak times, such as during the day, especially for stay-at-home parents, that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise offer them except in that 11-week window. And I would like to point that out. This is $1 million for 11 weeks of operation.
I think, though, you better be careful when you talk to people from Duluth about hockey, because I have good friends who can only get the hockey thing at 2 a.m. for their 12-year-old.
So, Commissioner, I understand. My time out in Colorado, we talked about building ice, and ice time does fill up. I would also argue, go ask your friends, are there more people free skating or more people playing hockey? And I guarantee you they'll say free skating. But you're right, hockey fills up, and you build that kind of facility, you can charge for 24 hours a day.
So I want to ask one other question, just because it'll probably hit the news media. I mean, I understand your vision here. It sounds like a good business plan, but it actually includes the destruction of all 3 of our current pools. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. That's an option. That was option that you can consider, consolidation and centralization. You can still operate. What I would suggest is that you pair up at least the 2. If it's City Park, you pair up at least those 2 and redo that.
Yeah, and I looked at the numbers, and it does make sense. We've got more outdoor pool space per capita than probably a city of our size deserves. I mean, I don't know why that happened, but that's the case.
We're one of the highest in the state. Actually,
and of course, making a statement like that is bold, because there's a lot of folks, as Jason said, won't like that idea at all of destroying 2 of the pools at least.
Sure.
But it may make sense financially if we're going to make this money thing come out.
Because conversely, you're talking about running 4 pools.
Correct.
Well, and the other thing that needs to be included in that is if we do that, the infrastructure is there to install splash pads or splash parks. That is a more equitable solution because they're free of cost. We can run them through October, or generally, depends on weather, but
February.
till tonight.
Monday.
But you're right, you can run them much longer than you can a swimming pool, and they cost nothing to the participant. And you're engaging in that aquatic entertainment, which is what they're after. And it's a good model to follow. And then centralizing a water park to have the features, and I'm talking big time features, would provide a better service for the entire community, because you can then invest more into that because you're pulling away the operations from the others.
See, I'm not opposed to that. I think, as John said, you do a business analysis and come up with some solution that works. Now, my other concern, though, is, we started off the discussion really talking about finance, and are we talking how to fix the city budget or how to fix pools?
I think they mesh together, Mayor. I really do. Showing the community the vision that Aaron has for City Park, it's very exciting. And we can talk about creating a Park and Rec department that is near the top echelon in the state. At the same time, there is a financial reality to everything. And when we go out, if we go out, if we're so inclined to ask this community to consider a sales tax, I do think having that indoor component or that city park renovation out there could motivate some folks to vote for this. We have to give them a reason. We have to explain ourselves in a way that Park and Rec and the fire department can be sustained moving forward, in addition to these amenities which you've been after us about for the last 9-10 years. And I'm sure as soon as we sit down, Tracy's going to give you at least 5 minutes of it in his allotted time, because there's just some passion out there. There's some real concerns about where the high school's at. I mean, maybe every time we talk to you all about taxes, we should bring Aaron up and talk about everything that we can, is on the horizon, because that's the push-pull. You all experience it all the time as elected officials. There's always a push-pull, and there's always this wrangling of what are we going to do, what are we going to continue to do, what are we going to scale back on, in addition to just absolutely understanding where the financing's at. Our strategic plan, Move MHK. These are things about moving Manhattan forward. And I will reiterate, we can sustain ourselves based on what we have available to us today through 2024, probably even through 2025. It's going to pinch things off, but again, you're going to reach a point where it's like, what are you going to do now? Where are we? What kind of balances are you comfortable with? What kind of services are you comfortable with? And that's truly where we're out a year and a half here financially looking at this. But in that year and a half, we've also got the opportunity to talk about indoor water and get this thing on a schedule and on a plan financially to sustain itself.
When I want to agree with you that it probably would make financial sense to consolidate those pools, but it is going to require some very sensitive conversations.
I just got told we're crazy. So.
My office hours are 8 to 5.
Especially in the Northview neighborhood.
Yeah, right.
So we're going to have to be very sensitive of that and make sure that, if that is the route we go down, that we have those conversations and make sure that those folks don't walk away feeling like we've just taken away their, one of their assets. We want to make sure that everybody feels like they are gaining something out of this. So.
Yeah, so and part of this, through Move MHK, we've partnered with architectural class at K-State, and they are actually working in that neighborhood, capturing feedback as we speak. So they may have some new feedback after today. Again, I would be happy to sit down with anybody or any group to kind of explain where this is going now. Remember, this is based off of a survey. The plan isn't complete. They're going to have their own recommendations out of that. It may include none of what I've talked about tonight. I was fortunate enough to my career took me to other locations that do Parks and Rec very, very well. And in doing that, recognizing how cost plays into that and expenses, and how Parks and Rec is a revenue generating arm, one of the very few of a city, and how all that plays together to offer the services that we were talking about. Seco is going to be a great addition, right? Outside of that, we're pretty much 30 years behind. I mean, that's the truth. And unfortunately, when you get behind like that, it costs a lot more money to get ahead. And I think that's, to Jason's point, what we're talking about moving forward with this. Now, like I said, Seco is going to jump us in there and help us pick up the pace a little bit. But we've really fallen behind compared to where the rest of the country is.
I think it's super we're working with Adibus, but they don't allow kids under 12 to ride by themselves, do they?
That's a great question. I'm not as familiar with that plan. I will also tell you, basically, if we could shut those down and put splash pads in, I could pay a person to go drive around in a bus to pick them up.
Well, we should.
And that could be a
use
consideration.
ATA.
That could be a consideration. And again,
Well, maybe we need to check with them, because I think that's,
yeah,
I don't know if that's an insurance issue or what it is, but I know,
could be.
having lived in Germany where kids as young as 6 or 5 go to school on buses by themselves,
So part of that diversity value is the ability to remove barriers. And if even if out of us is a barrier, there isn't something that says we can't hire a driver. We have a bus, we can hire a driver. Now we have to look, there are a lot of things that we'd have to look into for that. But there are other options on the table if that was the path we went down.
Okay, can we go ahead and take some public comment? And then we'll go ahead, John.
Kind of following up with what you said, Mayor, we started out with finance, and then we got into the pools. And I've already heard some of it, and I have to agree with it, even though, Jason, you said we're not in dire straits, it sure sounded like dire straits. We cut through $6 million worth of money in a year, and you're asking for a $7 million tax increase in the community. Now, I realize some of that money won't come out of just this community of its sales tax, but you're talking about putting the sales tax over 10%. And we're in a community that thinks we're pretty well taxed to the hilt as it is, both from property and sales tax now. And we're talking about, well, we're gonna have our cake and eat it too. We're gonna raise it and throw in the extra 7 million and throw in more money, because we're gonna even spend more than's there. So I think we're gonna need a combo approach. I think we're gonna have to tighten belts and look at some efficiencies, and meet halfway in the middle on this thing.
I would go back to Jason's presentation as well, and appreciate that you said that staff is already looking at means to streamline, to create efficiencies within their own departments. And I, for myself, would be very interested in hearing from them as those results are available.
Jason, could you go back to your presentation, the very beginning, when you show the 16 million, the one that
Is it just the text, or were you into a?
there was one that showed how much money was coming in, the carryover.
So the,
It showed,
I don't think I had another slide that had.
yeah, the beginning fund balance, the beginning fund balance.
This one?
No, he had it there.
This one?
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
I realize that shows that we're down from 16 to 10, but it also shows that the beginning fund balance in 2023 was 8, and the beginning it's kind of hard, the beginning fund balance in, can't see it.
2023.
Yeah, 2022
16.
was 8, and
Yep.
then it was 16. So all I'm saying is, we've got a lot of sort of moving around there. And the other thing I'd like to say is, we absolutely have to mark some of those dollars for IT. I mean, it's simply, we can't go on the way we are with the IT system we've had for 20 years. That's just crazy, especially with the scams and the people coming in and, doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And we need to get that fixed. We can no longer just kind of push it off.
Yeah, and I think we do owe you all a little bit more information, more detail. A half-cent sales tax will generate $7.5 to $8 million. A full cent sales tax, $15 to $16 million. Just dialing in this revenue stream it's important to talk about the dials you have control over in August and September are property taxes. The citizens can let you know if they want a sales tax increase or not, but 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 don't vote as to whether or not you raise their property taxes. You get to decide that. That's truly what you're elected to do on a budgetary standpoint, is evaluate that mill levy and make that decision. You can't raise the sales tax, but you do control whether or not it makes it to the ballot. And that's clearly your discretion. But the voter will tell us all whether or not these are viable strategies. So I just pointing that out. There all kinds of opinions, all kinds of realizations, but we're not going to spend $38 million in 2024. We're not. We know just eliminating vehicles, equipment, and capital improvements, we're down to 35. And we're going to trim it even more. More of a heads up. We're going to do that because it's prudent to do that. But we can't keep doing that 5-10 years. We need a strategy forward.
So the revenues over expenses in '22, most of that was from the COVID?
Yeah, you see the transfer of other funds, 12.6 million. We average about 6 to 7 million typically. There was a $5 million insert, and it's this right here. 5.2 million came out of ARPA. That propped us up for a couple of years.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I think you can squeeze things too much and not keep up in all fields, and you're ending up in maintenance, you're ending up in losing people that are excellent that you want to keep. It's fine to want to keep the property taxes flat, and I pay property taxes, but I think sometimes you have to just kind of say, this is, one mill is what now, 670,000 or something?
700, yep.
So 2 mills might get you out of all your issues with capital programs and maintenance and that kind of thing.
Susan and I sat down today and we looked at sales tax rates, really in all cities in Kansas. And I was a little shocked how many are over 10% in their special district areas. So these are the areas like our TDDs and our CIDs. A lot are over 10 in those areas. First-class cities, second-class cities, third-class cities.
Yeah, and people will pay, they'll vote for that, but they don't seem to realize that, it, until they go to the grocery store, and, their groceries are $83, but then they have to pay $8 more, and some of that's going to be assisted by Governor Kelly getting some of those pennies off. But I also think that realistically, it's not smart to strangle your capital improvements and that kind of thing. On the other hand, maybe it's time to take a step back on things like the cemetery building and say, we've got to, find some ways to do some things differently.
And this is where I owe you that conversation, because debt financing projects is different than funding this general operating fund. And I just want that to be abundantly clear. It's like a 3 to 4 minute, explanation, but where you have so many different revenue streams coming into that debt and then offsetting it. And again, we can show you historically, we have not pressured the commission for a long time to raise the mill levy in the bond and interest fund. We just haven't. It has been able to sustain itself. I mean, I think we're down to 3.6 mills. We operated at 5 mills for a long time. But we recognize that mill levy could be brought back and reduced because other revenue streams just keep going into that fund. So debt financing the cemetery project, I would still recommend we have those funds. We need to invest in our cemeteries. It's absolutely essential that we do.
I just threw that out as an example of perhaps,
Yes. It's
um,
exactly where people are going to go, Commissioner. And you need to understand the difference, because if you're going to entertain a sales tax, you're going to get questions on everything. Everything. And we know that. At 915, 945, a half-cent sales tax, it does keep it under 10%, but not in your special districts. And why is that? What are those funding? How long are those around?
Sure, and that's
All that
complicated, and it would be helpful to see that and just to have an historic
Yep.
view of what we'd put on at what point and what went off and what came on and what the state's doing, that kind of thing, because I think most of us are not totally up on that.
Absolutely. And the website that we went to today, I think there were probably a dozen sales tax rates in Manhattan because we're in 2 counties and we have all these districts. And it's complicated. And it's, which McDonald's are we talking about? Yeah, it's the one at 4th and
Well,
Bluemont.
I know people who
Yeah.
tell me they shop at one Dillon's because it's 0.5%.
Yeah, I mean, you're 945 in Pot County or 915 in Riley County, and then you go into Hy-Vee and you're 965.
Yeah.
Because you got that additional half cent. It is complicated, but I was just a little bit blown away on how many rates were over 10% because it had been so taboo for so long. But a lot of communities have went over 10 and even over 11 in some instances. There's a sensitivity to it. I recognize it. I'm reluctant to go a full percent or a 0.75. But I don't want to shortchange it. How many times are we going to ask this question? And are we going to rely on this revenue like we rely on the full cent to the degree we pretty much run our general fund with it? If you don't, if it's a reduction because we're sensitive, it puts that future conversation back on the mill levy, which is okay. I mean, it's fine to be there. It's just there's a political reality to it too.
And as Jason says, that, debt fund is sustainable, but one of the reasons that you didn't mention that it is sustainable is that recovery sales tax that we
Yes.
passed, because 70% of that goes in there.
Yeah.
So we're already financing that through sales tax, and I think that's very important because, clearly you can see that that's an effective strategy, because that's why we put that in place years ago, because the city debt looked like it was getting out of control, and this has made a significant dent in it. So can we move on to public comments, and then we'll come back to nailing down the details of what Jason needs for the staff?
Yeah,
Is there anyone that would like to come forward on public comment on this topic?
General fund snapshot or anything?
Everything that we talked about. General fund snapshot, we also had a Parks and Rec briefing, and I know you're interested in that particular
I
item.
was told originally this wasn't a public comment one, but why not?
Well, we voted to make it, so.
Oh, good.
Would you like for us to not have public comment?
Tracy Anderson, 116 E.J. Frick Drive, Manhattan, Kansas. I was here to sort of see your all's reaction to Aaron's presentation, to be quite honest, and I'm really excited about your questions and your comments to his presentation. I'm a part of the team that's the Move MHK consulting team, and when we interviewed for that project, the things that excited me was the team that I'm on, we set forth to say Manhattan needs a bold vision for Parks and Rec. And Aaron has that vision. And I think that's what has to come to play. And you're going to see what I think are some really exciting things here in the near future in regards to City Park, Northview Park, and Northeast Community Park. So I'm really excited that you're excited about that. And I'm really excited that Aaron is looking at this as Parks and Rec as a business and running it like a business and trying to do everything he can to make it a self-sustaining entity of city. So I hope we get there, and I think he's the guy to do it. Getting off of that for a moment, I've sort of went back and forth in my mind quite a few times if I should come up as the new commission here and say anything to you, but since I'm here, I might as well. I've said this to a lot of people, and some of you have heard me say this more times than you really want me to, but our community is in a race with every other community to try to attract businesses and people to our community. And the 5 of you are making the decisions that will help us do that. And so I hope your role up there in those chairs is to make the right decisions that propel this community forward to attract businesses, to attract people, so we can grow our tax base and do all these things that we want to do in our community and help spread those costs around. I'll be honest, if you're not sort of ticking off some people that voted for you, you're probably not doing your job very well. That's just my personal opinion, because there's always going to be people that are against anything that's change. But you all have the responsibility, even if it's not the popular decision, to do the right thing to propel this community forward. That's just my own take on it. So with that, thank you for hearing me out, and let's go move MHK.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
All right, Jason, if we could, I don't know, if we can try to formalize, the commission giving you guidance. I was thinking that one slide you had there that had the ERP on it, it looked like it had like 4 things that would maybe be a good format for.
You want to go back to,
Yeah, that one there, the one before,
okay.
because that's sort of what you wanted.
Yeah, these are things I feel like we can do this year without a whole lot of disruption to operations within the organization, but have a pretty good financial impact. Now, this would be coupled with moving that 4.7 million into the general fund with a strategy to end the year with a higher cash balance than we ended 2023. So I would not anticipate with that 4.7 million and these selective points of decision-making within the organization that we would not go below $11-12 million. I mean, I would actually think we would gain on our
Okay, now moving
cash
that
balance.
4 point whatever million in there, that means the ERP project would get bonded then?
Correct. Yeah, we could issue temp notes and bond that in a couple of years.
Okay, does that make sense financially?
It does, again, because bond and interest fund and the way we're processing debt, it's on a really good pace. And again, happy to bring that presentation to you all and give you a bond and interest overview, update, forecast, and understanding. We issue a lot of different debt under our umbrella, some of which is exposed to a debt limit that is set by the state of Kansas, and there's other debt that isn't. And just separating out water and sewer improvements, separating out special assessments with benefit districts, separating out special revenue debt that we have with STAR bonds and TIFs and other things, and then just looking at that general obligation debt and the revenue streams that are there to help offset those costs.
Okay, so commissioners, can you all comment just on that and the ERP? Is that the way we want to go or not?
Yeah, I think if it's only going to be a couple of years, we probably won't end up paying all that much in interest, and it may help us in the long run.
I'm a little confused. How are we going to pay it back? We're going to bond the 3 point whatever million. We'd just be in temporary notes for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, you could temp note for up to 3.5.
And you
could,
think we will pay off that debt?
we wouldn't structure it for more than 10 years if we issued
But it'd still be there for 10
bonds.
years. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
gonna, we're not, yeah, okay.
Yes, I think that this looks like a suitable approach for this year. I am a little bit concerned about this one-time infusion of cash, of money into the budget, and would want to see what other ways we can increase that, that cushion in the general fund.
Okay, and then, of course, the next issue I think you wanted some guidance on is this sales tax plan, essentially. Now, my initial thoughts on that, I've always been in favor of sales tax as opposed to mill levy, mainly because people seem to get more excited about mill levy, and every time we try to increase that, everybody has their hair on fire. And sales tax, of course, affects all those people that are living outside the city limits that come in here and use our facilities but really don't pay property tax for them. So that's one of the reasons I've always favored it. Now, I'm also real hesitant to raise the sales tax over 10%. But that's, again, I'm saying that for the flat sales tax. I mean, the city general rate. And I understand certain areas like the mall, it would end up being higher just because they added a CID and some other things to it. I think we have to do something about the operational thing, and that slide that Karen asked you to put up there that had the 4 increases, the 2 that hit me as most significant are, the public safety and the public works. We had the great pothole crisis here recently and had to throw more money in, and we need to have more operational costs for that. So I'm in favor of at least a 0.5 increase in that sales tax. I'm not so sure we can go all the way to 1, but 0.5, maybe 0.75. And of course, the idea of selling that is, again, like you say, consistency. You have to have a revenue stream to fund public works. I don't want to see us delay maintenance on a snowplow, because that's going to be a problem in the long run. And this is one way to possibly solve that. Now, it doesn't necessarily, solve the whole pool issue. It'll contribute to some solutions there. But as a step one is probably go ahead and put on the ballot and see if the population will support that. Because that just tells you if they support that, then that gives us reason not to consider messing with the mill levy. But, it already looks like the county appraiser is going to raise our values about 4% based on what's been published here recently. So, there's pressure on that end, but that's what my thought is on the sales tax question. And then I've always advocated that we renew the quality of life sales tax, which is 0.25. Now, if we were to go with a general fund one of 0.75, I could support that, but then we don't renew the quality of life sales tax because that'll keep us right around that 10% level. So that's my thought, but I'd like each commissioner to sort of comment on that so Jason knows which way to go.
I've got a couple of questions. So when the commission passed the budget in I guess it would have been in 22 for the 23 budget. We didn't pass a deficit budget, right? Did we foresee this $6 million decrease in the general fund somewhere, or did we just miss revenue projections?
Revenues didn't, there wasn't a significant decrease. We took in $1 million more revenue in 22 in sales tax. In 23, we took in about 200,000 in addition over what we took in 22. So 22 from 21, we realized $1 million more in sales tax revenue. 23, we realized a couple $100,000 difference. So it didn't keep up in terms of a pace of revenue over and above. There's also revenue that we were receiving from 2002 through 2022 that was our share of a countywide sales tax that we get from the county. This is complicated, but anyway, I think we end up reducing that amount over $1 million a year. So based on population, cities in counties that have sales tax get a percentage. So we would get 60% of the revenue generated within that county sales tax. We only get 5% of revenue that's generated in Pottawatomie County on their sales tax based on population. We have so few, and our valuation's part of that mix too. That's complicated. I can bring that formula back. We can talk about it again, but it is a loss of revenue that we had to realize. On the flip side, we passed a 0.5-cent sales tax that goes towards bond and interest, generates $7.5 million annually. So I don't get too caught up in that one because I'll take the 7.5 to do the projects in Aggieville and North Campus Corridor to hopefully generate more private investment, create Manhattan more attractive. Obviously, that's an economic development pitch versus the way we were using that money before, but that million plus came out of the general fund. We had 400,000 more in property insurance requirements in 23 than we had in 22. And again, I get back into the vehicle, the equipment, and the capital improvements. Then you look at, we spent $2 more million in 23 than we did in 22 on people. Half of that, over $1 million, went to Park and Rec. So I just bring up those stats and just food for thought in terms of where we're putting. Fire department's not far behind. I mean, there's just a lot of expenditures for people. And when we look back at those individual budgets, I was telling Rebecca today, in August, when we passed the budget for 2024, our cash balance in our end of month August report was over $15 million. And then in September, it was 14.3. And then in October, it dropped down to 13. And then in November, it dropped down to 12. And then by December, it dropped down to 10. Those are significant reductions on a monthly basis. And I started emailing Rebecca and Rena in November, like, hey, what's going on? Why are these dropping so quickly? You do take in a lot of your revenue up through August and September in your organization, but there's in our lean years, the spending really was watched year round, and with the balance being where it was and it maintaining itself, it didn't cause a lot of issues until the last couple months. It's a difficult thing to rein back at that point in time, and I didn't really put an absolute finger to it. But in 2023, we actually had an extra pay period. That took a huge impact in December. Now, we transferred some sales tax in, we offset some things, and we're at a point with that $10 million where I am like, we have to do some things different. We can't have another 2023. Yeah. And had we known we were going to end the year at 10 million, my reaction to lowering the mill levy by 3 mills would have been a lot different. But I couldn't see it. I couldn't tell just exactly how the vehicle, the equipment, and even the personnel side. 2023 was the first full year of the pay study and the rates actually being implemented. 2023 was the first full year of us operationally impacting budgets every month to fund future vehicle and equipment and capital improvements. So did we learn some things? Absolutely. Are there strategies moving forward to dial that back? Yes.
Okay. So I guess my comment would just, and this may be kind of rambling, but really it comes down to we haven't increased our tax base. We haven't grown in several years. I think without the COVID money and all of the federal assistance, we probably would have been having this conversation 3 years ago. So we've got, the way I see it, we've got 3 options. We increase sales tax, and potentially enough that we could maybe sell a property tax decrease if that were the case. We don't increase sales taxes and we have to increase property taxes to maintain our current level, or we cut things. And that's a really hard decision. That's a really hard conversation to have. So I'm with you, Win. I think, when we talk about sales tax, it's up to the voters. We are able to capture some of those dollars from folks coming from outside. I would say we've probably got a cap at about 10%. That would put us, aside from the special districts, I think that would put us at the highest in the state. Now, a lot of those cities that have those special districts, that's pretty much the only place where folks can go to shop. But, that's not necessarily the case here. So I just think, we do have a very low capacity for any tax increases in Manhattan. I feel it, everyone feels it. But if we want to move forward and grow as a city, we've got to make some hard decisions. So, obviously I want to see some more details, some projections on how it might affect our bottom line and things like that long term. But yeah, I think I'm definitely open to having that conversation moving forward.
One of the things that we talked about this afternoon also was the pent-up demand for construction, which would do a little bit to increase what properties are on the property tax roll. I think that a number of developers are waiting to see where we come down on the RHID and what guidance we offer the city in terms of those incentives. And, several people have said to me, they put the brakes on a couple of projects until they see what we're doing, what they might be able to request from the city. So that's not going to impact our fiscal decisions this year, but it may be something that'll alleviate slightly some of the issues in the next several years.
How do you feel about the sales tax question?
I think it makes sense to put it on the ballot and see if people support it. I think we need to do a good job with communicating with the people of Manhattan what it takes to run the city, what it takes to fill all those potholes in the course of a month. That extra resources were required in order to do that by hiring out, by contracting other companies to do some of the work. We have to be really clear about this. We can't just talk in shorthand. We can't just rely on our media to present the full picture. I think it's important that we articulate that as frequently as we can.
Okay, excellent. Karen, what do you think about the sales tax question?
I'm willing to consider it. I think we need more information. I also think that we may have to man up and raise property taxes a little bit. 1 mil, 2 mils isn't going to be more impactful than a half cent on most people. They just don't see it. It comes in one fell swoop. And, just to keep trying to keep mill levies at the level of 2016 or something just simply doesn't work. And people have to understand that for services that they wish to have. And I think it's so important that we keep up with our capital improvements and our fleet management and that kind of thing, because it's really short-sighted to not fund things adequately and then end up having to pay twice for your. Also, I think we need to be a little bit more informed. We've talked about, we bought the land for a fire station in Pot County. Fire stations are really, really expensive, not just the fire station and the equipment, but the personnel. You're probably talking $6 million there. And maybe I'm low on that. So I'm not saying that I'm against it by any means, but I just think so often we sit here as commissioners and say, okay, to this parking structure and that cemetery business, and don't stop and think that these things are going to cost money, and we better be willing to face the public and say, we've approved these, and we're also going to have to ask you for $100 more in property taxes.
Okay, John?
Yeah, first to add a little context too, we did lower the mill levy at the last budget, but the residential people still saw a 6% increase in property taxes. So it's not like we didn't take the revenue number down. It was the,
Some people didn't, though.
overall, the amount of residential property tax went up about 6% for the total city. So there was still a property tax increase.
When you say total city, you mean city, county, school district?
No, from the
With PD?
yes, with PD.
Does not our
Yes,
15.
yes, with PD.
Yes.
The, on the sales tax, I think it's gonna be up to the voters to decide. I do prefer the sales tax over the property tax. I know you said 0.75 and then not do the quality of life, but I would actually like to see those separate, because to me, the quality of life is kind of the referendum on the pool and seeing whether we get that support or not, so I'd rather see those broken up, but I think we're still gonna debate that before we come up with.
You know, I agree with that, John. I just said that would be my two options. 0.5 I can go with. I won't go with 0.75 if we still do the quality of life, so. Okay, so it sounds like, you know, what you've got here is at least 4 that would say put this on the ballot and let the voters decide if they want an increase, and I think we've agreed to about 0.5 is generally the consensus. And then I think everyone agrees with your general fund plan there. But also with severe reservations about doing damage to, you know, getting rid of the wrong vehicles and things of that nature, because Karen's absolutely correct. We can't afford to, you know, to get too far behind on certain vehicles for public works.
The 4.7 million will integrate into our budget discussions. We're not gonna move that money right now. We can wait and move that later in the year. I just wanted to float that, get your reactions, see where you were on it. If we can use it or a portion of it to take care of the ERP, we absolutely want to honor that. But again, we're gonna keep monitoring this general fund very diligently. We'll work with legal and bring back some options for you all to consider with language for a ballot. Permanent sales tax language in the past has been very short, like very short. So we'll see where we're at in today's legal world. If we can keep that short and concise, I hope we can. But we obviously need to make sure it's a valid question and people understand what they're voting for.
Wynn, I'd like to just say that I'd like to see some projections of amounts generated at the 3 different levels
Sure.
of sales tax. So are we looking at 0.25, are we looking at 0.5 or 0.75? I don't feel comfortable tonight just making a blanket statement saying I support 0.5%.
Yeah, and just as a quick reference, 1 full cent, $15 million. Half cent, $7.5 million. Quarter cent, $3.75 million. Just so, I mean, just if the 1%, $15 million. And then you can just chop it up however you want from there. 0.1, 0.25, 0.3. You can do the math from there, but that full 1 cent generates $15 million in Manhattan.
Yes, and then the mill's about 680,000.
Yep.
And so, you know, when you look at that, big deal on mill.
Yeah.
You know, if you get the sales tax, you're not gonna be raising the mill levy that much, and even if you keep the mill levy flat, it's still a tax increase.
Yeah.
You know, as we discovered, the past couple of years, so, excellent discussion. I think we've covered everything you need, Jason?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
So the next item on the agenda is the city manager's update. The purpose of the briefing is for the city manager to review future agenda items and provide general updates. And commissioners can report on meetings and attend as a city commission representative and give us feedback and discuss potential training, educational opportunities. And we can coordinate calendars and things that we want to put on future agendas. So maybe, do we need to take like maybe a 5-minute break?
Sure, that's fine with me.
So everyone can take
Susan,
so let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll convene with Jason for the manager's briefing.
The Discovery Center has children's duck stamp.
Work session.
Is it 9? I thought it was 10. Okay, well, we're gonna,
I mean, the
I'm only gonna be a few minutes, like a couple. we can get started for you all if you're ready. You do, yep, you do have a copy there of the next couple meetings, March 5th, March 19th, and then on the reverse side, there's a list there of work sessions. As I'm talking, if you have questions, I'll come back to you here in a second on any of those items. We can expand on those. If not, we can continue to move on. You do have an MRC luncheon Wednesday, March 6th. They've got 4 of you attending. Actually 3 of you and Ron. Susan, Karen, and John are planning to go. We have the City Leaders Academy, the foundational program. I believe this is the League of Municipalities event, Friday, April 12th at 2 p.m. at the Hilton Garden Inn. Right now, we have Susan attending that.
When do I need to let you know about that by? I think it's the 1st?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Just let us know if you'd like to attend. Joint City County, March 21st. We're here. Food and Farm Council will be in attendance providing an update. If you have an item, please let us know by March 14th. And InterGov is Monday, March 25th. And again, if you have items by March 19th, would be great. National League of Cities, I know Susan's attending a conference in DC, which is, she's going to represent us on the Hill and talk with our representatives and senators, which would be great. Otherwise, that's all I had for you this evening. Any questions on the 3.5, 3.19, or future work session schedule?
I'll probably be out for the May 14th work session.
Okay.
Okay, I just have 2 quick things. One, as Katie said, on work session nights, we're supposed to be done by 9. So that's why we're trying to go through this, because we set that. And then board appointments, I sent my recommendations to the clerk here today. I'm still waiting for some feedback, but there's the recommendations. I promised to share those with you before. That would be on the 5th March agenda. So if anybody has an issue, you can read that. Part of the problem with these board things is we don't have a lot of people putting in applications to be on the boards. And so essentially, you know, we're scraping the barrel. A couple of them there I couldn't make appointments for because nobody applied. So if you know of anyone that you can recommend to get an application into the city clerk, it'd be appreciated.
Oh, I also won't be at the May 14th.
Well, hopefully 3 of us will, so we have a quorum.
I could probably zoom into that one. I'm just going to be on a work trip, but yeah.
Okay, well, if you can zoom in, that would help. Okay, so any questions on the board appointments or any concerns? No. Okay, so they're not really appointments, they're recommendations. The commission makes the appointments. Okay, do we have anything else to discuss? No. If not, then we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the February 27th, 2024 work session.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Mercola,
Yes.
Commissioner Opelt,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes?
Mayor Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Adamchak.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Then the Tuesday, February 27th City Commission meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.